Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to go through my Sunday watch list. So usually I post my watch list on Instagram. I thought I would do an in-depth watch list on Sundays, just so you guys can see a full breakdown of what I'm watching for the week, exactly the plays that I'm looking to take. And if you guys have any stocks that you'd like me to chart as well for you, I will do that as well. Another thing that I'm going to go through with you guys is the economic calendar. This is what I look at every Sunday to kind of determine what's going to go on during the week, if it's a risk off week, if there's Fed speaking, if there's any economic data that I need to look out for as well. I'm going to go through that with you guys. So it's kind of going to be my weekly Sunday routine, as well as my Sunday watch. All right, guys. So the first place that I go to is the economic calendar. Like I said, I like to take a look at what's going on in the week. If there's any Fed members speaking, if there's any economic data that I need to be watching out for. So I go on to us.econoday.com, and then this is how I determine whether it's going to be a risk on or risk off week, if I need to wait until certain economic data comes out. So for example, this week what we're looking at is all of the red tagged ones, and then anytime that Powell speaks or the Fed member speaks. And if you scroll down here, it'll give you a little key guide onto what's important and what's kind of just there. So for this week, Tuesday, we're going to look out for existing home sales. This is during market open, so at 10 a.m. So for example, on Tuesday, I will look to not trade until new existing home sales comes out. Existing home sales comes out at 10 a.m. So I will risk off until 10 a.m. After that, we have new home sales on Wednesday and PMI, both during market open, one at 9:45 and one at 10 a.m. Again, I will risk off until 10 a.m. once both those data pieces come out. And then Powell speaks during market open as well. Whenever you have a Fed member speaking, especially Powell during market open hours, you always want to be aware of this and risk off. So because Powell isn't speaking until Friday at 10 a.m., I am anticipating that most of the week the market will be choppy. So whenever you see that a Fed member, especially Powell, or if there's Fed news coming out, Fed meeting coming out, anything like that, if it was, let's say, for example, Wednesday that this was happening, Monday and Tuesday would be risk off until the news comes out. Now, since this is on a Friday and it's literally the end of the week, we could potentially see choppiness until Powell speaks on Friday. So I will be risk off all week this week until Friday, when we get to see exactly what Powell is speaking on. After I look at the economic calendar, I'll look at the earnings calendar to see if there's any stocks that are on my overall watch list that are reporting earnings. I look at Earnings Whispers. There's tons of other sites that you can look up, but this is the one that I use, and I follow them on Twitter. Just looking at the overall calendar here, the one that stands out to me is going to be NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is reporting earnings after close on Wednesday. So all throughout this week, NVIDIA will be on watch. Now, that being said, I do not hold a stock through earnings, and I do not play a stock through earnings. I will trade the stock before and after they report earnings. So Monday and Tuesday, NVIDIA will be on watch. Wednesday will be on watch. After it reports earnings, usually what you'll see is the day after. It tends to be a little bit choppy just because it has made, or it does make, a significant move after the earnings comes out. And then Friday as well, I will keep NVIDIA on watch. So NVIDIA will be high watch for me today. And just looking at all the other ones, none of the other ones really are on my full watch list besides probably Ulta, but nothing that I trade on a day-to-day basis. So once I look at that, then I go ahead and chart my stocks. And before I go through how I chart my stocks, I do just want to say I always look at the 3-year weekly, 1-year daily, and 4-hour time frames when I'm charting my stocks. I will then also look at what the weekly high and weekly low was for the previous week on any ticker that I'm watching. I usually chart on my iPad, but for the sake of this video, I've already charted everything, and I'm just going to go through a breakdown of the stocks, the top stocks that I have on watch list. As it goes through pre-earnings, it will have a lot more volume, IV, and liquidity will be increased as well. You will notice that the premiums on NVIDIA will also be a little bit increased, but you just want to be mindful of that when you are trading. So that being said, looking at NVIDIA's chart, it broke out of this daily and 4-hour trend line, made the way down, retested. I'm looking for NVIDIA. So NVIDIA has this wick to fill here. So I'm looking for NVIDIA for puts below 425. I always take the 5 or 10 point level down. So below 425, I'm looking for NVIDIA to fill this wick down to around 417, and then a target of 415. Below 415, I have targets of 410. Sorry, I have my watch list written up here. 410, 407, 403. 403 is the weekly low. and then 400. Now 400 is a key level on NVIDIA. Below 400, it can definitely sell down. I have targets of 395, 388, and 385. And these are just levels to the downside that I have on NVIDIA. So like I said, main watch is going to be below the 425 level for this wick fill. That is a high probability setup there. And then below 415, it can sell back down to 403, which was the weekly low. And then the 400 level is going to be that psych level on NVIDIA. If, for example, we get a bounce, so NVIDIA ends up holding, and you can kind of see here, it does have a trend line to the upside that it is trying to break. So depending on if we get a break or open above the trend line on NVIDIA, I'm looking for calls above 440 with targets of 445 on NVIDIA, and then 448. Above 448, NVIDIA has a wick to fill to 453, and then it has targets of 455, 460, and 465 on NVIDIA to the upside for the week. Just keep in mind with its earnings, it's going to have increased IV. Premiums are going to be a little bit more expensive, and it's going to move a little bit faster. So if you're not used to that, then don't trade NVIDIA this week. Next on watch, we have Tesla. So Tesla is in this daily channel here, and you can see it a little bit cleaner on the weekly time frame here. So you can see it has an upper trend line and lower trend line, and kind of just trading in between that channel on Tesla. So what I'm looking on Tesla for is a break below 210 for puts. Below 210 on Tesla, I have targets of 207, 202, 198, 195, 184, and 180. 180 being the weekly target. If we do get a nice sell down, Tesla can sell down to that 180. But in between those, so when I say, for example, Tesla below 210, that is my initial level for entry. And then the targets below are going to be other profit targets if you're already in the trade. If you're not in the trade, they're going to be entry levels for you to be able to enter on the downside. But just understand that when I say puts below 210, I'm looking for puts on Tesla below 210. The targets that I mentioned to the upside or downside are not only profit targets, but they're also other points of entry and support levels or resistance levels that I have on the stock. So for calls on Tesla, I will be watching it above 220. If it bounces off of this trend line here, I will be watching it above 220 with targets of 226, 230, 235, 239, and 245 to the upside on Tesla. So main watch, or the highest probability setup here on Tesla, is going to be a break of the trend line and the 210 level. Tesla can sell down all the way to around 200, and then the 195 level, which are going to be the key levels of support and the key levels of resistance I already mentioned on Tesla as well. Next on watch, I have AMD. So the reason I have AMD on watch this week is because NVIDIA is reporting earnings. So because NVIDIA is reporting earnings, AMD could also move in sympathy with NVIDIA earnings. So you can see here, AMD has a trend line that has been holding 1, 2, 3 touch, and it bounced off of that trend line this week. So I'm looking for AMD for calls above 107. Above 107, it has profit targets of 110, 112, 115 being the key psych level on it. Above 115, we have 117, 119, and then 120. And you can see that it has a lot of wicking around that 115 to around 120 level. So if we do bounce, I definitely see AMD bouncing towards that 120 level, and even towards the yearly and weekly highs there. To the downside on AMD, there's a couple plays you can take here. The safest play, so I'm going to go through the safest plays this week just because it is a risk off week with Fed on Friday. I will be looking for AMD for the break of the trend line. Now, the break of the trend line here is going to be below this 100-point level. The 100-point level also being a psychological level on AMD. If it breaks, we could get a nice sell down below the trend line. The highest probability setup here on AMD is going to be a break of that trend line below 100. Below 100, I have targets of 97, main targets of 95, 93, 90, and then you can see that AMD has a wick to fill below this 89 level here, has a wick to fill all the way down to the 80-point level. So that is another high probability setup. Not saying that AMD moves in that type of increments. You probably won't see that in 1 week, but if it does get down to that 89-point level or $89 level, we can see that wick fill down to the downside. Okay. Like I said, the targets that I set are weekly or 2-week targets. They're not going to be daily targets. On a day-to-day basis, when you're scalping, you're going to have some smaller targets. These are more daily, weekly targets for you to be able to look at when you're looking at the stock overall. The next stock we have on watch here is Meta. So Meta broke out of this daily trend line really nicely. You can see that it was hugging that trend line very well. So Meta broke out of the daily trend line. Now we can see two things. We can see a continuation down on Meta, or what we most likely will see is a retest of the trend line before it continues back down. When you see a trend line break, usually once it breaks the trend line, it then retests the trend line before continuing down into the downtrend. So if we go ahead and look at the daily time frame on Meta created a weekly low of 274. So I'll be watching Meta below 274 for puts. To the downside, targets to the downside are going to be 271 I have, and then I have levels at 268, 265, 262, and 258 on Meta to the downside. To the upside, I would want to see Meta above 290 for calls. Now, this is a little bit of a steeper target to the upside or entry to the upside, but I do just want to be safer this week on most tickers. So I will be watching Meta above 290 for calls with targets of 295, 298, 300, 306, 308, and 310 to the upside, 310 being the weekly target that I have on Meta. What can happen here, if we get a proper trend line break, we're going to get a retest here. It can retest all the way up to 310 before it continues back down. And the final ticker that I have on watch this week is going to be SPX. So SPX had this daily trend line here that it already broke, and then it has another weekly trend line here as well. And this looks a little bit better on the weekly time frame if you go ahead and look at it. So you can see it is holding that weekly trend line. It broke this trend line here. So let's see if it can sell down to this weekly trend line. Now on SPX, I'm looking for puts on SPX below 43.30. So below 43.30, I have targets of 44. So below 43.30, I have targets of 43.15, 43.08, 4,300 being a key psychological level on SPX. And then below 4,300, I have levels at 42.80 and 42.65. Target on SPX I have, if we sell down, is 43.50. The 50 and 100 point levels are going to be magnet levels. To the upside on SPX, I'm looking for SPX back above 4,400. Again, like I said, the 50 point and 100 point levels are going to be magnet levels on SPX. They're going to be the key psychological levels. So I'll be watching SPX back above 4,400. What we can see is a full retest of that daily trend line that it broke. So above 4,400, I have targets of 44.15, 44.25, 44.50, 44.40, 44.50, 44.80, 44.90, and then above 44.90 has a wick to fill to 45.27. So above 4,400, we can potentially see targets of 44.50 and 44.90, 44.90 being the weekly target, like I said, on SPX, if we get a nice little bounce in the market and a move back up. And those are all the stocks and plays that I have on watch this week. I don't usually have a huge watch list. I like to watch around 4 to 5 stocks per week, and then on a day-to-day basis, depending on which stocks have catalysts, I will narrow that down and just focus on 1 to 2 stocks per day.